Hello, everybody. It is 3:30, which means it is time for one of the Headwaters Science Center's after-school STEM shows. And so these are shows that we do every day, 7 days a week at 3:30 on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. So you could be watching me on any one of those platforms right now. Twitch.tv/Headwaters Science Center, Facebook.com/Headwaters Science CTR, or Facebook.com/Headwaters Science Center. Any of the three will work for you. And so what we do is every day we have one of our educators here at the Science Center come up with some sort of science-y topic and do a short 20-ish minute talk about it. And so topics can range all across the board. It could be, I'm going to be talking about some biology stuff today. I did some geology, kind of paleontology stuff when I was on here last time. So it's bouncing around to a bunch of different topics. So whatever you're interested in, there's probably going to be something for you that's interesting to see on one of these shows. And today we're going to be kind of doing, like I said, sort of a biology thing, but also we're going to be talking about something that I get a lot as a question when I'm out on the exhibit floor, which is, of the animals that we have here, which ones make good pets, which ones are easy to find as pets. And so we're going to be highlighting probably one of, if not the most common pet critter that we have out on the exhibit floor, which are bearded dragons. And so we have two bearded dragons that live here at the Science Center. We have right here is, depending on who you talk to, either Leo or what's James call him? Scorch. Scorch was his original name when he moved in here, but we held a Facebook contest to name a bunch of our critters, and this one got mixed up in it. And so Leo is the one that won. So like I said, depending on who you talk to, this one might have some different names. And then we also have a second bearded dragon that lives here. And this is Pog, or Pogo, or Pogona. Pogona is the full name, but Pogo or Pog is what I usually call him. And you can see right away, something that's worth addressing if you're thinking about keeping bearded dragons as pets, is that you might notice that Pog right away is scrambling, trying to get away from me here potentially. And really what he's concerned about is this guy, Leo. So it just so happens that both of our bearded dragons that we have here are both males. And oftentimes male bearded dragons will get territorial with one another. And so one of the things you might notice is that he's actually showing off his beard. Which is part of the reason I brought both of them up here, is because I was hoping he'd puff his beard out that I could show you. So that's what the namesake is they have this little beard, this little pouch kind of underneath their throat that they can puff out. And you'll see his is even turning black. And that's a thing that they'll do when they're trying to look intimidating, trying to look imposing, trying to scare somebody off. And so in this case, he's trying to talk to Leo here and say, hey, this is my territory. I don't want you in it. I'm the dominant male here. And Leo doesn't care. He's much younger. He's much smaller. Like, he wouldn't win a territory scuffle if there is one. But we do have kind of an interesting dynamic here between these two, where Leo is younger and smaller, but he was actually the first one here at the Science Center between these two. So we had Leo first, and then Pog is the one that came later, and so he's kind of an invader in Leo's territory, and they've never really gotten to resolve it. So Pog is kind of the up-and-comer in a lot of ways, even though he's 3 times older and probably weighs twice as much as Leo does. But it is something to keep in mind. A lot of times people want to, if they're going to get a pet like this, they'll want to get more than one. And so something to keep in mind, this is true for bearded dragons, but it's also true for a lot of animals, is to know the sex of your animals. Because, like I said, we can't keep these two in the same cage because they would fight each other like crazy. Well, he would fight him like crazy. And so we have to, because we have these two, we have to keep them in 2 separate tanks, and we also have to be mindful of where we're keeping those tanks. Like, we can't even have them to the point where they can see each other, because he'll spend all day just trying to posture and be intimidating at this guy, who, like I said, barely pays attention to him, to be honest. So yeah, something to be mindful of. And like I said, it's true for bearded dragons. It's also true for a lot of things. But yeah, look how nice and black his beard is getting there. Which is an interesting feature, again, is the color changing. The bearded dragons, when they are upset, will oftentimes turn their beard black. And that's something that bearded dragons can do, but is actually a relatively common trait in a lot of reptiles, is being able to change colors to a certain degree. It's actually a a good way to kind of be aware of like the relative stress levels of your critters is if you're noticing that they're changing colors, it probably means something is stressing them out. So knowing kind of what color your critter tends to sit at, and then so you can be like, okay, it's suddenly way lighter today than it usually is. It probably means something's wrong. And like I said, a lot of cold-blooded stuff will do that. Fish, notably, do that like crazy, where when they're calm, they're usually a darker color, and as they get stressed out, they get lighter and lighter and lighter. But anyway, bearded dragons. Leo here is a little bit easier to handle. He's a little bit more chill. He's been here with us since he was just a couple weeks old, so he's been here going on 2 years now. And he's still relatively young. He's still got some growing yet ahead of him. And bearded dragons can live to be 10-ish is about what I tell people for the average on them. So I say you can get them when they're just a couple weeks old, and then you're on the hook for them for, if everything goes right, probably 10, maybe a little more than 10 years. The one that we had before these two, the one that these two were kind of replacing, was 13 years old when she passed away. So you can get a little bit past 10 with them. Pretty common, pretty easy to find critter. Like I said, they've been pretty popular in the pet trade for a while now. Last maybe 10, 15 years. They've been probably the preeminent lizard pet that you're going to find really anywhere, these and leopard geckos. So pretty easy to find, pretty accessible. The other thing that is notable about them, though, that it can be a little bit of a challenge, is they get bigger than any of the other lizards that people really buy and keep as pets. People get anoles, which are teeny tiny. People get geckos, which tend to be pretty teeny tiny. But these guys, because they get bigger, and you can see with him, if I pick him up and stretch him out, put his chin on my finger there and stretch his tail out, and if he'd stand still, he goes up past my elbow, which, you see, I happen to have a handy yardstick right here. So he's about 20 inches long, and they never completely stop growing. You'll get the occasional like real big one that can get up to 2+ feet long, and that means you got to have a big cage for him too. I think the tanks we have ours in right now are 75-gallon tanks, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there. Not exactly 100% sure on that. They're also very good climbers, so you want to have a lot of verticality in the tanks. So you want a wide bottom, but also some climbing structures in there for them. And of course, they are reptiles, which means you got to be mindful of things like the light spectrum that they're getting and the temperature that they're in. Because unlike your cat or your dog, these guys are cold-blooded, which means that their body temperature is whatever the temperature in the world around them is. So if you're not providing them a heat source, they're not going to have one. And so generally, if you're setting up a bearded dragon tank, you want to have a basking light in there with a basking spot. That's about 100 degrees is about the generally recommended temperature for a basking point. And so that means you're going to have a rock or a piece of wood or something that is underneath a light, and you want that spot on the ground to be about 100 degrees is what that means. And then typically you're going to want to have a gradient of temperature. So you have a warm side, you have a cool side. And so your cool side, you can get down into maybe the 70s for the cold side of your tank. And then the hot side, like I said, it's probably up in the 90s-ish with that one particular basking spot that's sitting at about 100. Light spectrum also matters a lot, particularly bearded dragons and most reptiles need what's called UVB light, so an ultraviolet light, category B. I don't know, honestly, off the top of my head what the difference is between a UVA, UVB, UVC. There, you can get any of them. But UVB is the one that you generally need for most reptiles. And basically it's what that does is it helps them process calcium. And so the diets that you're going to see for a lot of bearded dragons and a lot of reptiles that you keep in human care are not 100% like the diet out in the wild. And so they tend to get either too much calcium is a relatively common problem, or not enough calcium is... Calcium's tricky to manage, I guess, is where you're going with that. And so giving them exposure to that UVB light helps them process that calcium. And if you don't get enough of it, you'll start seeing health problems with them, whether that be skeletal ones, or the other thing you'll start seeing them get is like kidney problems if they don't get enough UVB radiation. And so that's something you'll see in a lot of the lights. If you come and visit the Headwater Science Centers, you'll see a lot of our critters have kind of specific lights on them, and a lot of it is that UVB just for, like I said, mostly digestion issues is what we are mainly concerned with here. Speaking of which, diet, another very important thing to know, and one of the reasons that bearded dragons are probably as popular as they are is because they are what we would call an omnivore, which means that they are content eating, well, not just content, they need to eat meat and plants. And so they want a variety of things, but they're actually pretty, they're not very picky eaters. It's not hard to come up with a decent meal for them. But you got to be a little careful about exactly what you're feeding. So you can try out fruits and veggies with them, but it's always a good idea to look it up before you feed a thing to them. So things like onions, for example, are toxic to them, so you don't want to feed them onions. But they'll take, any old leafy green you throw in there, they're happy to take it. They'll eat a lot of fruit. Insects, they're all about that. Most veggies, they like things like, we'll throw in like blueberries. Most of the critters are a big fan of. And so it's always a good idea to be looking stuff up every time you introduce something new, just to make sure it's not toxic. But for the most part, if it's not onions or avocados or cabbage, it's probably fine. At least in small doses. And in particular, what's really important for their diet, and this is something you might encounter and you might notice with the bearded dragons here at the Science Center, is these guys are very much desert critters. They're from Australia originally. They're called central bearded dragons because they're from central Australia, where there's not a whole lot of water. And so these guys are interesting in that they a lot of the times will not drink water from a dish. They don't even recognize a pool of water as being a source of water. So they a lot of times won't drink from a dish. And we'll see, we offer them dishes, but they spend a lot more time climbing in it and pooping in it than they do actually drinking out of it. And so where these guys get most of their water from is from their food. And so especially if you're primarily giving them a pellet diet, which you can just buy commercial bearded dragon food, it's a thing. You'll want to make sure to supplement that with some nice fresh veggies too, because that's where they're getting most of their water from. And they do still need water. The other thing you can do with them that'll get them drinking every once in a while is just give them a bath. Just put them in give them a little soak, and sometimes they'll drink there. You calm down? You ready to come out and visit? Nope, not really, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So you can see what he's doing there is kind of posturing at the other one, that head bobbing thing that he's doing. It's him trying to, again, tell Leo that this is his territory. But one of the things I want to talk about also that's kind of cool, and this is a thing that is very much a product of bearded dragons being relatively popular in the pet trade, is you'll notice that these two are relatively different colors. And so Pog, this guy, you'll notice is kind of a yellowish or kind of an orangish, especially around his eyes. He's got some nice orange coloration around him. Whereas this guy's kind of a brown, kind of tannish color. And so one of the things that we humans tend to do as soon as something becomes popular as a pet is we start breeding it for appearances. We start trying to make animals look a certain way. And you can see this in a lot of critters. The other one we talk about this a lot with on the exhibit floor at the Science Center is Orion the bunny, who has all sorts of traits that are very domestic, things you would never see in a wild bunny, like his floppy ears and his weird pattern and his flat face. All stuff that wouldn't help him out in the wild, but humans think is cute, which has its own benefits. We call that artificial selection. And so Pog is an example of something else that has been artificially selected for with his light color that he has on his back. These guys usually get marketed as what's called citrus dragons because of their yellow or orange coloration. Whereas Leo is more the natural. This is more what they would look like out in the wild. And this is going to be better camouflage for them in the areas where they live. But not quite as showy. So if you're looking to purchase, generally the wild, they call them morphs in reptiles, the different colors they call them. So this would be like the wild morph, whereas this would be the citrus morph here. And generally the wild ones are going to be the cheaper ones, and then the more specialized ones are going to be a little bit more expensive. But it is a thing that is available, and like I said, has kind of an interesting history because it's not something that exists in the wild ones. They're all pretty much the same color. The other thing that is very notable that we have, as humans, bred into bearded dragons in the few decades that they've been in the pet trade. A lot of the dragons you'll hear marketed also as leatherback dragons. And both of ours actually are leatherbacks. And so what leatherback means is that they've been bred in a certain way to shrink the scales on the back, so they have more but smaller scales on their back. And the idea is that it makes them a little bit softer on the back. They're not quite as rough and prickly on the back to be a little bit more handleable. And so that's another thing that we bred into them to, again, make them more appealing for the pet trade. Again, something that would not benefit them at all in the wild, but helps them get into the pet trade, which, like I said, if you're thinking about it in the context of natural selection creating evolution, being appealing to humans is really good because this guy does not have to worry about finding food. This guy does not have to worry about finding predators. This guy just gets to live a pretty cushy life, and if we decide to breed him, he's going to reproduce and pass those traits on. So he's probably a lot more likely to survive and pass his traits on than a given egg in the wild would have been. And so that's why they keep getting perpetrated, is because they are more likely to be successful and pass their traits on. And that's all natural selection cares about, is did you reproduce or not? And so the traits that make them appealing pets end up getting selected for. It's kind of an interesting evolution tidbit there, even as it applies in not a very natural setting. So yeah. Any comments, any questions, any concerns about our bearded dragons? Well, if so, feel free to put them in any of the chats. We check them over after the shows are done. Especially Facebook, we're usually in the Facebook comments pretty quick after the shows are done, and it stays up there for a while, and we're pretty good about responding to those. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. We are open right now, and we're actually starting to reduce our COVID restrictions a little bit here. We're starting to expand the number of people that we're allowing in the building at once. So we are starting to move into a little bit more normal here. So if you want to come and visit us right now, you can. We are open right now Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we are open, Friday, Saturday, Monday, we are open 9:30 to 5:30. Sunday, we are open 1 to 5:30. We're also starting to take reservations for things like group visits. And so if you're a teacher out there or a organizer of some group or another, you can call in and schedule either your group to come in and visit us or potentially us to come and visit you. Which is a thing that we're just starting to get back into here now, because all of our staff actually are vaccinated as of last week, and so starting in basically April, we're going to start doing outreaches again. So exciting news, new things on the horizon for us. I guess old things back on the horizon for us. But thank you all for watching. It's going to be James tomorrow. I don't know exactly what he's going to be talking about, but if you're interested, then we'd be happy to have you watching again. And if you happen to be around here at 3:30 tomorrow, you can probably come and see whatever James is talking about. We're usually happy to have guests come and watch us do these things. Got a little bit of an audience right now. Hey, everybody.